start. This talk is called Helping Players Hate or Love Your Nemesis. My name is Chris Hoge. That's right, pronounced hoagie like the sandwich. I'm the lead systems designer at Monolith. I think we'll start off with a video that shows us a little of Shadow of War. All right, at Monolith, our recent products have been Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. We are based in Kirkland, Washington. It's a great place to work. Here's a little pic of our office building. A little bit about myself. Before these two products, I worked on several others, some Lord of the Rings based. Before that, I was in children's games. I did several. Here are a few of them. And before children's games, I was designing in other industries. I did a little designing for test systems for the F-16, designing oceanic fiber optic cables, and I lived in Africa for several years. In the Nemesis system, what we like to do is we like to surprise and delight the player and evoke these emotions of love and hate. So this talk is going to be about that. We're going to get into the Nemesis system. We're going to talk about how we do this, why we want to do it, talk about some philosophies of our design, and some tricks and a lot of examples. And here's the summary in case you got to go. The players hate it when you inhibit their progress and insult them, and they love it if you help them and entertain them. And it really helps to have a long relationship, as long as possible, and it helps to be a memorable orc, to be a nemesis, not only in who they are, but what they do. So what is the Nemesis system? Well, a short answer could be it is procedural bosses. I like this longer answer better. It's an interconnected game mechanics that allow players to develop Nemesis-style relationships with systemically generated enemies using systemically generated events. And when I say Nemesis-style relationships, what I mean is that classic relationship that is long-term, that you see between two main characters over time, where there's respect and fear of each other. So there's a lot of examples of these. Here's a few that you probably know. This is Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, and this is Beowulf and Grendel. So the Nemesis system isn't what it's all about. It's only a part of the game. There's a huge set of game mechanics and systems that exist. Nemesis system can only be enjoyed and even perceived if these other things are in place and are awesome. And it isn't a separate thing either. It is deeply integrated. It's got its roots in everything. The whole team helps to bring that whole thing to life. And the Nemesis system can be thought of interesting stories. And interesting stories can only exist on top of a sense of normalcy. Once you establish normalcy, you can have the interesting things happen, because only when things stand out as interesting, then people say, oh yeah, that's different than everything else I've seen. So the best example of gameplay for the Nemesis system is the revenge loop. And in the revenge loop, it follows these steps. The orc kills you, then you respawn, and this is important, time moves forward in our game, which means you don't go back to where you were alive. You wake up later, then you decide to hunt down the orc, and then you kill the orc. And This is different than what players want. Of course, they want to kill every orc and they want to never die. And when this is deviated from their expectations is when it starts to get really interesting. So I have a video of this revenge loop. I'm going to show you now, and I spliced it and I sped up some parts so that we can get to the really interesting parts, and I highlighted them. So let's take a look.
Submit now, and perhaps I will show you a bit of mercy. Nothing personal. I'm just following orders from my overlord. He says kill the Tark, I kill the Tark. Actually, it was a little personal, because I really do hate Tarks.
So here, time moves forward.
I see.
Now I'm trying to find the orc again.
No, this is impossible. I slaughtered you with my own 2 hands. Fine. If I can do it once, I can do it again.
All right, let's talk about when time moves forward. In a lot of single-player games, you actually have the option to, or you're forced to even, go back in time. And what that means is it's part of your thought process. So pardon my crude designer drawings, but here's me playing the game, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is a hard part. Should I save? Maybe I'll reload. Maybe I'll reload version A or version B. Now I'm actually in my own gameplay process. I'm like watching myself in my little time travel experiment. I think I'll reload B if I fail here, otherwise A might be good. In our game, we are forced to move forward in time. You don't have the option to go back, and it's freeing in a way. It helps you focus on what's happening immediately. You don't have to play that little experiment because all you're focused on is what's going to happen next, what just happened, and you end up being very emotionally involved with the immediate events that are happening. And the bonus is you have a longer relationship with the orcs because now they have a memory that they can hold. So in the revenge loop, here are the emotions that go through the typical player. Like, oh, I'm so frustrated, I just died. And then most people, they abandon whatever they're doing, and they're like, that orc, he's dead, I'm going after him. Then they hunt him down, they find him, and then they kill him, and then they're like, oh, this is so amazing, that felt good. And I liken it to a roller coaster, so like, oh, I hated that part, oh, here we go, yeah, that was a great hill that we went down. So here's the key, is that we like the negative emotions, we really like it. Because it leads to that glorious result. In fact, if it's strong negative, it leads to a stronger positive. So we want that roller coaster hill to be higher if possible. It's also similar to doing hard work. So here's a fruit tart. If I make a fruit tart, it's a lot of work to put into it, but man, after you finish, it tastes way better. So we have support for this. Here's a couple. George R. Martin says, fiction is about emotional resonance, about making us feel things on a primal and visceral level. And so I interpret that as emotions are the whole point. If you're not going to do the emotions, why even do it? So here's an article we got when we released Shadow of War. So this article, so like I'm being bullied by Mozu, that's his way. So. Oh, awesome. This article is very satisfying to get because it shows that he's on his way up that roller coaster, and a few days later he wrote the subsequent one. And he shows like, yeah, it was proof to us that this is working like this. This is really where it's all about. So this leads me to philosophy number one. So I have a bunch of philosophies, and by the way, they're kind of all swirling and all over the place. So they're not really part of a list. It's not exhaustive. I have, I think, 7. So here's philosophy number one. We want to maximize the hate. Why? Because the resolution is way more sweeter. And there's 2 parts of this. One of it is that the orcs are mean, and the other is we want to get you to hate the orc, not hate the game. And so let's talk about orcs being mean. There's a lot of tricks we do, but we basically try to do it everywhere we can. One example is the kill animations. You saw that example. When that orc kills you, we show those brutal. It's supposed to look painful. You know, Talion is suffering. And then when he stands over you and talks to you, he insults you. He says things that are really aggravating, if possible, or memorable. And then when he's promoted, he's like, yeah, I'm stronger now because of your failure. And then we also spend a lot of time focusing on the orc's face. And the next time he meets you, of course, he insults you again. Why, you died, I can kill you again, you're so easy. So let's talk about the death taunts. Death taunts is the moment right when you're dying, and he looks over your dying body, and then he says something insulting. I have a little clip showing a few examples of being insulting and memorable.
If you're the best that men can offer, this war will be disappointingly short.
You wanted to beat me, didn't you? Must be frustrating losing the way you did. Just makes this all the more fun for me.
For this, maybe a few times. I could be war chief, I could be overlord, I could be whatever's above that. We come to this, your sad little end. I do like to think we were almost friends.
Okay, we want to get the player to focus their hate on the orc, not the game. And the key to this is the players have to feel like there was a solution available to them within their grasp, something they could have done to avoid it. Oh, if only here's some examples. If only I won that last chance minigame. If only I got intel, I would have known he has that special move that killed me. Oh, I forgot to run away. We can always run away in our game. So here's a story about this. During development of Shadow of Mordor, we were putting in the trait No Chance, and before we had the banner that showed across the bottom of the screen, it was partially working, and it was implemented. We were experiencing it in the game. Bob Roberts said, oh, this feature is terrible. It makes me feel terrible. Why are we even doing this? And then the banner finally got in the game, and he said, oh, yeah, okay, now it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Because it means I could have known, if I had done research on that orc, which a lot of times you need to do, I would have seen he has no chance. It would have changed the way I approached him, my behavior. I could have avoided it. So let's go back to that loop that I was talking about. So you first meet the captain, he insults you, and then you get killed, and this is the moment of aggravation, of course. The orc's promoted, and I want to point out that you don't have to be killed by a captain. You could be killed by a grunt. And that's kind of the beauty of our game. It's not just the captains. Any grunt who happens to get a lucky shot on you can kill you, and then he'll be promoted to captain, and then he'll be just like all those other captains. And then, of course, you hunt him down, and you have the option as a player to give him a death threat, and I'll explain that. It means you give him a warning, I'm coming for you, a message, and then he prepares and he gets stronger. Why would you ever do that? It's because when you do get him, your loot is way better. So then you meet the captain again, he insults you again, and then you finally, if you're lucky, defeat him, and a lot of times they give last words if they can. And then you finally, yeah, I killed him, I got my loot, ooh, this is the good feeling, right? So last words, let's talk about that a second. Last words is when you get him on his knees, it doesn't always happen, but it happens with orcs who, if the circumstances are right, and this is an orc that you know really well, he'll say something to you, and they're meant to be memorable and emotion-provoking, and I have a little video showing a few examples of last words.
You think you're better than us? You enjoyed the kill, don't you?
Catch some drops of my blood, Ranger. Carry it with you, so we can be close.
There was so much more to eat! Maybe you won't see me again, but there's someone who will come for you. He is my brother by blood, and he will come for yours.
What are you waiting for? I don't have any last words, except for what I just said.
So the loot. When you do a revenge loop and you kill that guy, your loot is even stronger than before, giving you a better payout, and it's personalized. This is an illustration of a loot, a ring that it has a quote from the orc who you just killed and his name, so you can always look back at your loot and say, oh yeah, I got this one from Mozu. And if you happen to put a death threat on him, then your loot is even stronger. So philosophy number 2, we want to maximize the length of the orc story. And by this I mean like the roller coaster, right? We want the ride to be really long because it gets better. You feel all these, bad but yet good, bad, good. So the easiest way to maximize the length of the story is the orcs should not die. And the easiest way to prevent the orcs from dying is you make them really hard to kill. Now, this is a potential problem because you get this loop and somebody meets the orc a second time and then they die again. And then they get double angry. And then they meet them again and then they die again and now they're triple. And they're like, oh my God. And if they're able to break out, then they're triple happy and they're really feeling good about this moment. And the mechanism they have to break out of this is they have a lot of tools at their disposal for how to approach and kill this orc. And it could be like wait till later until I'm stronger. It could be bring my allies with me, use beasts, use stealth. But if they can get out of that loop, it's really glorious. It's important that every orc that you meet is beatable. And here's a trick that we use to make sure every orc is beatable, is that each one has a built-in weakness. They can't shed it as they grow. So in this little diagram, this orc has, I put the red as the strengths and this blue's weaknesses. Got a little yellow one there, which is secretly marked as he'll never shed this. An example of a strength might be, I'm immune to fire, and a weakness might be, I can be killed by fire. So as he grows, he will randomly grow. We don't quite know what's going to happen to him or the experiences he's going to have, but we're sure that there's always a way that you can kill him. And so an example of that might be he's instantly killed by stealth attacks, which you could have killed him when he's level 10, but as he grew, you didn't realize that, but then there's still a way that you can get that guy. So we like the longer stories. So I'm going to add a few things to this diagram talking about longer stories. So there's humiliation. One of my favorite features. The orc doesn't actually kill you. As an exception, he looks over you and he says, you're not even worth killing. He insults you and then he walks off. And then, of course, you can find him again and re-engage. Some players forget that they can run away, or the orc will try to run away. This is a change from Shadow of Mordor. In Shadow of War, we realized we want these stories to be longer, so we thought really hard about how to help the orc escape. Aside from just running and other tactics while he's running, we have death defying. This is a trait that some orcs have. At the moment you get him down, he's on his knees. You think he's going to give his last words, and then he looks up and he says, I'm not done yet, and he gets a breath of second wind, and he's back up, and you have to fight him again. Of course, you may not defeat him at that point. He has another chance. Or there's a tricky escape. He looks up at you and he goes, I got one more trick up my sleeve, and then he hits you, and then he runs off screen and he escapes. Now that's kind of a cheap shot, so we can't use that too much. But if it's an exception once in a while, it's kind of a cool story, and the orc lives to have a longer story. You can always shame the orc. This is when you momentarily make him suffer, and he'll go down a level. I'll talk more about shame a little later. Or, of course, you can recruit him. He'll be on your team. And that's awesome because now you like him and you want him to survive, and now his story will be prolonged. I'll talk more about that guy too. And then cheating death. So cheating death is really powerful because you've already gone through I got my loot, I'm so happy, I killed him. And then he basically announced to you, you thought you killed me, but I really wasn't dead, I'm back. And of course, that's really emotional. Like, what? I spent so much effort trying to kill you, and now you're back? And then it can be awesome, and it can be terrible. Like during development of Shadow of Mordor, we had to make sure that this loop didn't go out of control, because if a guy comes back too much, then it gets aggravating. But a little bit, it's awesome. So this is where we control it. Right there, we say, well, maybe he doesn't always cheat death. So who cheats death? We need cheating death to be an exception. It can't happen to every orc. It has to be an amazing thing. What just happened? Oh, I didn't know that could happen in our game. Oh yeah, that does happen sometimes, that kind of thing. So what we do is we keep track of the interaction you have with every orc, and they have a little score. We call it the player interaction score, or PIS for short. Yeah, we thought that was a really clever name. So then if their PIS is really high, then at the moment of their death, they have a higher chance to cheat death. And then that chance is reduced over time. So we can't let them cheat death infinitely. Unless, of course, you cut off their head. Everybody knows if you cut off their head, then they're not coming back. They're dead for sure. But you can't control that. The way the game mechanics work is, when you get an orc down, you're not sure whether you're going to use that animation that cuts off his head, or you're going to stab through his chest, or a number of other animations. So we do something else here, which is, if there is an orc who is a candidate for cheating death, like we can tell you really hate this guy, then we actually protect him. We say, no, you're not going to actually cut off his head, because we want a chance, that chance that he can come back and have a longer story. And then after he cheats death a couple times, then we're like, okay, now you can go ahead and cut his head off. Because we know that feeling of cutting that orc's head off, you're like, why don't you stay dead? And then his head goes off, you're like, oh yeah, that really feels great. This chart shows the survivability of orcs. So for a typical player, I mean, there's all kinds of players, but typically you will meet 85 captains who you will kill in your first encounter with them. And then you'll meet 14 who you'll have 2 encounters, and then about 4 who you will have 3 encounters. And this area is the area where you have a Nemesis-die relationship. You start to care really, like, who is this guy? Why does he keep defying me? Or why does he keep escaping? Or why is he haunting me? He keeps chasing me down and killing me. Now you might say, oh, 85 is a lot. That seems like a waste. Like all those orcs, they're just dead instantly. Well, I mean, you have to have an exception, right? If that 85 was as low as those others, then it wouldn't be an exception for these long-term relationships. And actually, we root for these orcs. When we're in play tests and we're watching players play our game, we see an orc die, and we're like, oh, I hope he cheats death. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that prolong his story? It'd be so fantastic. Philosophy number 3, we don't know who your nemesis is going to be. Why? Because it's all random. It's all about what you do in the game. So it's really better if your nemesis is actually as a result of your actions or interactions. So because then you're more emotionally involved. It's because of what you did or didn't do. So what we do is we basically just seed the world with lots of orcs of varying types, and if you make a mistake, well, that's an opportunity for that new relationship to start. And by the way, these 2 guys, Bruise and Zog, are not the same as the rest of the orcs. They are forced upon you as a player. You have to be these guys. But after they finish telling their story, then they're basically released into the system. You can do whatever you want with them. Oh yeah, and you gotta remember your nemesis, or the orcs that you meet. This is really, really important, and so I'm gonna sort of shift that and talk about remembering orcs for a while. If you can't remember an orc, how are you gonna have any opinions about him? How do you have any relationship with him? So how do you make anything memorable? So you're gonna meet someone. How do you make yourself memorable so that they will remember you? Well, I talked about 2 things already. Do something that will impact their emotions, have a long time meeting them or many interactions. And now I talk about my friend Daryl. Okay, this guy, I went to school with him years ago. And what's interesting about him is I haven't talked to him since I went to school. And he doesn't know that I'm talking about him now. And he wasn't even that good of a friend. He's one of my friends, you know, but he wasn't my best of friends. And yet, at the same time, I remember him better than some of my close friends. Why is that? What about him makes him memorable? So I'll tell you a little bit about his personality. He was a little bit opinionated, and he was kind of assertive, but he loved life, and so he had a really strong personality. And so this is my theory, which is it's not about being likable to be memorable. It's more about having a unique identity. So we try to make orcs have a unique identity so that they can be memorable. And if you want someone to remember you, have a unique identity. It helps. Okay, so another point is breaking the norm. Doing something really strange will help you be memorable. So I'm going to tell a story now about Brian Pamatwan. He's a friend of mine at Monolith, and he told me an interesting story that he did long ago for a girl he liked to try to make himself really memorable by doing something really unusual. Actually, it's kind of an embarrassing story. Maybe you promise not to tell it, but I don't think he'd mind because it really is applicable here. So what he decided to do is he decided to dress up. You said you weren't going to be here. All right. I guess I don't have a story about Brian. Actually, I actually don't really have a story about Brian. We decided to orchestrate a little orc confrontation here to illustrate breaking out of the norm. So because of this moment of conflict, we wanted you, what? I wanted you all to say, oh my God, what's happening? Maybe to make this speech a little bit more memorable. Yeah, thank you. Okay, how do we design memorable orcs? Well, we usually start with their identity. Here's a guy, Golem Firebrander. I mean, it's procedurally chosen, but this guy, if his name is that, we already know a lot of things about him. Let's talk about his visuals first. I mean, he's probably going to be fire-related. He's got a fire weapon, you see, probably a branding iron. We can make other things interesting and memorable about him, like he's got this goggles. Maybe you'll say, oh, that's kind of weird. If it's not something you see often in the game, it'll stick out. His dialogue can stick out as unusual. His taunts during his combat. We have this thing called mannerisms, which is it's kind of like a subtle thing that they say over and over. Not all orcs have this, but once in a while an orc will just repeat themselves over. It's time! Every time he hits you, it's time! Now you might get really annoyed at that in the same way that Princess Bride, like, stop saying that! And so that was the point, is that it becomes irritating and memorable. In combat, they might have specific attacks that you remember, oh, that's the guy with that one attack. Other behaviors they might have, he have certain kinds of ambush, maybe he shows up certain times repeatedly, it becomes part of his identity or where he lives. Anyway, we try to do as many things as possible to make him memorable. I'm going to show you some examples. This is the maggot. So he has a problem. He's suffering from maggots. He's got like maggots eating away at him, and he complains about it every time you see him. He uses that opportunity to talk about the maggots eating away. He can feel them in his scalp eating away. And so when you look at this guy, is he terrible or wonderful? Well, if you think this is terrible, awesome, because you have an emotional reaction. If you think he's wonderful, awesome, because you have an emotional reaction. So it turns out he becomes memorable because of this unique identity he has. And the more time you think about him and why he's this way and how he feels, of course, the more memorable he'll be, which means the more likely you'll have an emotional response when he kills you or escapes or whatever. Here's some more tricks we use. We use name dropping in death taunts. They'll lean over and they'll say to you, "It was Grisha who killed you, remember that." And then maybe Grisha will be something that you remember, so that when you go hunt him down, it'll be, oh yeah, it was that guy, it was Grisha. We also do this, the orcs remind you of your history. Last time you ran away. And of course, the player doesn't always remember, but it really helps if the orc reminds them, oh yeah, I guess I did run away. And then it'll reinforce that, and it'll become the truth. So philosophy number 4, we want to actually maximize the correlations between their identity and the things that we do to help you remember them. So you never know how they're going to be noticed. We ask playtesters after they play the game, who's your nemesis and what do you remember about him? And we were surprised. It wasn't always visual. Sometimes it was audio, sometimes it was combat, sometimes it was the way the orc found them or behaved with them. And so basically we want to do everything we can so that they become memorable. So this guy is the diseased. He also has a problem. You know, he's got a diseased face and arm, and he's got some boils on his chest. He's got poison things around his belt. So we try to do everything we can. They only get one chance, usually. You saw that chart. They're probably going to die the first meeting, but if they don't, this is awesome. This is a good guy to have as your nemesis. And we try to use outrageous things whenever we can, and tropes help. And by the way, this part of the orc visually is way more impactful than the, see, he's got a belt around his belt, he's got jars with eyeballs in them, and that's all cool and all, but it's not as impactful to the player as everything around the head and shoulders area. That's something we learned. Here's another orc, the dwarf hater. So here's his concept before he was made, and then the other one's an in-game shot. So this starts off as an idea. Oh, what if we have an orc who just hates dwarves, and that's all he thinks about, that's all he talks about. What would he look like? Well, maybe he has dwarf paraphernalia. Maybe he collects dwarf beards and dwarf skulls and wraps them around as jewelry. Maybe he finds dwarf equipment, dwarf helmet, and it doesn't quite fit, but he shoves it on his head anyway. Maybe his weapon, we didn't do the weapon, but this is our idea, is that it was a crow cage with a dead dwarf in it, and when he strikes it, the dwarf is bobbling around inside. That was technically challenging. So we did implement this trait. He has a hate of dwarves, so he's the only guy in the game who has a hate of dwarves, because it makes sense for him. And then another thing is that the game doesn't have any dwarves, so that it's not triggered unless you derange his mind, in which case he thinks you're a dwarf, and then, of course, he'll become enraged at you. So one more. So this is the blast. He's you can just look at him and tell a lot of things about him right away. He belongs to the machine tribe, and if you get to know the tribes, you'll already know a lot about him. You know, you can tell by looking at him that he's in the machine tribe. He's got grenades around him. You kind of tell where he's found. He's got a fire weapon. He's got this thing on his back. It turns out it's a flame cannon, so he'll burn you with that if you can. So you might say, hey, Hoge, this is a lot of specific crafted content for a procedural game. You started talking off, this is a procedural enemies. Well, yeah, yes and no. The game has a lot of systemic mechanisms for putting things together, events and orcs and situations. And when it gets down to the granular level, we do have a lot of finely crafted things. And it's a ton of content, but the two of them are blended to try to make it unclear about how the system really works. Philosophy number 5, the scope and nature of the design should be unclear to players. This is intentional. We don't want players to feel like this is a mechanical thing. We don't want players to figure it out. We want them to be instead surprised and delighted. There should be a feeling of discovery and wonder. What else is out there? What haven't I found yet? Oh, look, I found something really great. I'd like to find more. This is the type of feelings we were trying to evoke from the design. And I think I'm going to tell my friends about this game. Let's talk about telling friends. So this became a metric for several of us on the design team. Is this feature that we're considering implementing going to be great? Is it so great that players will blog about it? And what makes players blog about a feature? It's got to be amazing, right? It's got to be so amazing they practically fall out of their chair. So it turns out they blog for like 3 different reasons, and we focus on number 1 most of the time. It's they meet something really interesting, unique, or number 2, they have a lot of emotions all tied up in this situation. They want to talk about it, or number 3, they want to talk about how great they were and how they conquered their problems. And then when players hear these, especially the first one, they think to themselves, well, what else is out there? I didn't see that. Maybe I should explore the game more. And that's great, because now players are questioning their understanding of the scope of the game, and they're waiting to be surprised and delighted even more. And to facilitate all this telling of friends, we use natural language in the announcements and the orc dialogue. For example, this is a banner that comes up in screen. Ushak the Unkillable, for example, is a random enemy. Became deranged. Look at that, it's already in sentence format, using words that are easy to use in your blog if it happens to be something that happens to you and is worthy of talking about. Natural language. So philosophy number 6, exceptions. We love exceptions. We love exceptions to exceptions. This is something that we think about a lot. And it includes the development process, which supports making exceptions, which is tricky because how do you do that? Well, if you can manage to support a development process which allows people to discover new ideas halfway through, oh, we should add this thing, I didn't think about it before. Yeah, if you add it, sometimes those are the best things. They lead to more memorable and interesting situations. So here's what I think it normally takes is forward-thinking game programmers. What are the features that designers are going to ask for later? How is this feature going to expand in the future? Data-driven content so the designers can do a lot of tweaking of things late in the cycle, and a flexible production schedule so that we can add things a little bit late. Oh, can we get that recording session? We have these new lines. Can we fit it in? Oh, maybe, yeah, okay. So we have to be okay also with not all the content being found. We do a lot of work on these specific stories, and we have to be okay as developers. The player's not going to see everything. Maybe somebody will see it, but maybe not each person will see it. Because what that'll lead to is maybe people will hear about it from others. Maybe they'll question their understanding of the scope of the design. Really, it's all about having exceptions. The feeling of exceptions leads to you remembering the experiences, remembering those orcs, so that you can have a relationship with those orcs, so that you can develop those emotions that we are trying to evoke. Okay, I got some examples of exceptions. This is the Blight and the Claw. Here's 2 examples of transformed roles. And when we say transformed roles, they change who they are. So instead of just cheating death and coming back and saying, oh, I'm not dead yet, they'll say, I'm not dead, but in the way that you killed me, you have transformed me. The first guy, the Blight, was poisoned by you. And he comes back, and maybe he was someone else, like the Sneak or something more generic before. And now he says, this poison, it has like changed who I am, has gone inside me. He talks about how he feels about it, how he's stronger because of it. And now he has poison-based attacks, and he's really aggressive. So the other guy, the Claw, you probably killed him by stabbing him and cutting off his arm. And then he comes back and he says, I am now the Claw, I am reborn. And he shows you his claw all the time he can and talks about it. And he tries to kill you with it. And these guys are fairly unique. We can only allow the player to see these once. As soon as you see these twice, they're now a system, right? They're now mechanical. They're so unique. Here's 2 more. The Avenger. If an orc ambushes you because he came because you're attacking his blood brother, and then he manages to kill you, he will change his title. He is now the Avenger because he avenged his blood brother. And the other guy, the Uncatchable. If an orc manages to escape from you like 3 times, I think, then he will change his name to be the Uncatchable, or the Elusive in this case. So for cheating death, I already told you this is an exception. And then I've just described to you transformed roles, where now they're even stronger because they cheated death. We have a double exception. You cut off my head, but I'm not dead. These 2 guys, the The guy on the right is the Stitch, who has his self stitched back together. You can see the stitches around his neck where his friends pulled his body together, quickly put it. This is the story he tells when he comes back to you, like, I'm still alive, and it's because they've stitched me back together. And the other guy is the Machine. He's put together with metal parts, and he says, it's because you cut me in half. You have created the Machine. It's because of you. You're the reason I'm alive. They're your nemesis. Hopefully, I mean, you might kill him right away, but sometimes it works out great. So how do you make an exception? Well, obviously you have to establish what is normal, and then you have to subvert what is normal. And really that's all about adjusting the frequency of something. So with regard to humiliation, let's think about the chance of something happening 0 to 100%. And obviously if it happens a little bit, it's an exception. And if it happens all the time or often, it's considered common. And so humiliators live at about 6% in our game. Right in that space where you feel like, oh, that was kind of odd, but then if you see it a second time, you're like, oh yeah, that thing again. It's on the orc itself. It's not like him deciding to do it, so an orc will be a humiliator, and he'll humiliate you over and over every time he kills you, because that's a great story. So an exception, the first time you see it, like, what was that? And then after a while, you're like, okay, I get it, and then it's in relation to what is normal. So somewhat related, but not really, is what I say to my kids around dessert. You're not allowed to have seconds until you have firsts. Yeah. Okay, other features that feel like exceptions. This is the sword breaker. So what happens sometimes is if you get killed by an Olag, he'll look over you, over your dead body, and instead of just taunting you and being done, he'll reach down and he'll take from you your sword that you were just now using. He'll hold it up and say, this sword is nothing to me, and he'll snap it and shatter it, and all the pieces go. And why would we do that? It's because we're trying to evoke these emotions. And in fact, this is so strong. We were worried it would be too strong that players would quit at that moment. So we gave a message right after this saying, don't worry, you can get your sword back. Go hunt this guy down, kill him, and then your loot will be your sword again, but stronger. And so people do that. And it's very satisfying. It's like so satisfying that some players, they speculate to themselves, like, how can I get this to happen again? But it doesn't happen very much. Here's another one where an enemy will ambush you, but instead of just showing up and ambushing you and saying, hey, I'm here, he'll show up with one of your buddies in his arms. And then he'll say his line like, this follower that you have is worthless, and he'll slice his neck. And then the follower is down on his knees, bleeding out, moments until death. And now you're faced with this situation like, oh, I want to save my buddy, but this guy keeps hitting me. I can't do it. We were trying to establish an exception with heightened emotions for the moment. Here's another exception. When an orc normally meets you, they just usually announce themselves. Here's an exception to that.
Ranger! You see that orc? He's so lazy he can't even be bothered to taunt you. Instead, I have to do it. So, here goes. You're ugly, and you're gonna die.
All right, let's talk about shaming. So, when you shame an orc, what you're doing is you're putting your hands on his head and you're using your elf magic to get into his mind and torture him. And it was originally designed as an outlet for people who hate their orcs so much, their enemies so much. They're like, killing is not even good enough for you. I want to torture you. Actually, it ended up being a mechanic where you need to lower their level, so you shame him so that you can lower their level so that they can be low enough that you can recruit them onto your team. And by the way, if you feel bad about torturing these guys, that's kind of cool because now you have these emotions like, oh, should I be doing this? You know, Talion's kind of mean. Am I kind of mean too? Normally when you shame them, they're usually just angry about it. They'll talk about it, about, oh, you shame me, never again. They'll have a little scar on their face. Once in a while, they'll be deranged, which means you have affected their mind in a permanent way. They will never speak normally again. Instead, they adopt this weird phrase, often related to who they were before, and they'll just repeat that over and over again. Some players have regrets about this. Oh, did I just destroy his mind? And then you can also get the double exception, which is now you've deranged him, but you've created a maniac. This guy will become the strongest orc you've ever met and will chase you down, and hopefully he'll be your nemesis. Of course, we don't know. Okay, some examples of exceptions that we got because we were flexible, late development, okay? So in Shadow of Mordor, we got the Screamer. If you played the game, most everybody met a Screamer orc, which is basically just screams. He doesn't say anything, and it's an exception. And when people meet that, they're like, oh, that's kind of weird. It's a little unnerving. So what do? We quickly ran around, got the lines, we got the body animations, we subverted all the logic, and got it in, and it worked great. So in Shadow of War, here's an orc we got in kind of late. One word. I like his title because as soon as you find out who he is, you can't wait to hear what he's going to say. You know he's got to say one word and only one word, and it turns out he says a different word each time you meet him, depending on the situation. So he's kind of interesting. Then there's these guys, Baz and Gaz. So you only meet Baz and Gaz if you play through the game and you've gotten through the story of Bruce. Now Bruce, you have to meet, and he's a scripted narrative kind of orc who we really like, and he had a real good personality, and he had an Australian accent, and after you're done with him, we're like, oh, can we prolong the story? Yeah, so we added these guys, and they come, they also have Australian accents, and they have the same personality, and they show up really angry about how you were mean to Bruce. We have this orc trait called decoys. So tricky orcs will sometimes have a gang, and their gang will all be dressed up just like them and even have the same iconography above them. You can't tell who is who, and hopefully you'll be a little confused as you're fighting. Is this the real guy, or is this just a decoy? And then this is one of our favorites, promoting to Overlord. If an orc kills you, instead of like just him being promoted a little bit, he's promoted to Overlord. And now you can't actually find him until you get into that fortress, do a fort assault, and meet him in the throne room. That's really great too. Here's an orc. I'm going to show you a video, the Inscrutable. He is designed so that you can't quite understand what he's saying.
Not as big as they say, you, not nearly. Spit to the men and all I got's a gold belt. You speak language, do you? Speak blood, do you? Speak guts? Because I don't reckon you'll be waiting when I rip your throat down so fast it'll whistle.
All right, exceptions are only appreciated if the players understand what's going on, and it comes down to messaging. Sometimes it isn't enough just to have dialogue explaining what's going on. You gotta do more. We use the army screen, we use UI banners, we try to do more. We need to emphasize this even more because sometimes there's confusion. In the army screen, we have some stories told, or in quest complete screens, hey, this just happened by the way. Sometimes it's text, sometimes it's symbology. Audio does a great part too. Sometimes the audio or the music will hush in such a way, subconsciously telling you, hey, something really interesting is about to happen. Pay attention. Here's a story about a messaging and how it kind of worked, kind of didn't work. We saw a couple blogs of people who experienced this. A follower will cheat death, and normally they'll just be angry at you. And they'll look like this. But sometimes a follower will still be loyal, and they'll say, hey, you thought I was dead, but I'm back, boss. And some players don't quite understand that, and they'll start hitting the orc before they get a chance to swing at them. And of course, it's a follower, and the follower just goes, ow, ow, ow. And then the second exception kicks in, which is if you hit your follower too many times, then he'll betray you, and then you get this message, and that's when the blogger says, wait, what just happened? You mean he was on my side this whole time and I just forced him to betray me? And now I have to get him back again as a follower. So that's an interesting story, how messaging is really important. So I talked so much about hate. Let's talk about love. So it's best to have both, love and hate. So I would categorize, there's two types of love we want to focus on. One is Nemesis withdrawal, and the other is attachment to followers. So for Nemesis withdrawal, what we mean is, oh, that was my favorite enemy. Oh, is he really dead now? Oh, I had so much fun with him. Oh, I hope he comes back. We hear this a lot from players. And so that's nice, We don't always control exactly what's happening. It has random elements to it, but we like to foster that type of emotion. Also, attachment to followers. It's natural when you have a follower and you spend time nurturing him, you have a feeling like, oh, I'm responsible for this guy. Oh, I hope he does well. You spend time thinking about what he's doing. You spend time thinking about like how he can be more powerful so that he can be a better follower. Even the act of recruiting him is you saying to the game, I want to like this orc. I have decided I'm going to care about him. The other is orcs being helpful, and the orcs can be helpful in a number of ways. Of course, they can help you kill enemies, which is the biggest deal, and they can bring you gifts. This is a new feature. We got into a patch recently when sometimes a follower will just show up out of nowhere and say, hey boss, here's a treasure orc, and he'll kill him for you. And then the best is the savior moments. Savior moments is when you think you're going to die, and the orc saves you. This doesn't happen very much, but when it does, it's spectacular. Here's the video.
Saved your guts there, I did.
Okay, and yet, is there always the inevitable betrayal? Will the followers always betray me? Well, it is their nature. It's kind of what their society is built on. They often do, not always. It's also interesting to note that Talion and Celebrimbor don't really like the orcs as much as you, the player, do. It's really, they see the orcs as tools or just they want to kill them. But betrayals are kind of neat in a way that they can bring orcs back into the game as an enemy. And now you've got another hill of the roller coaster. More emotions to experience. If you really like the orc, you want to re-recruit him, go ahead. If you can, sometimes you can. And then you can go through that process again. Try to keep him. If he dies, you can always use your necromancy skill late game and raise him from the dead, and then you have a zombie follower, and then he won't betray you then. Of course, that's a trade-off because he just groans then. Okay. So here's an exception about love. I talked a lot about love. Here is an exception to the love.
They told me about you, but they didn't mention your beauty. No, sir, they did not. Oh, you're mine now, love, forever and ever and ever.
Okay, is it terrifying or glorious? Well, either way, it's great. For me, it's both. So in summary, so we don't know what the player is going to do. So there's so many random elements to the game. We just seed the world with possibilities and we see what's going to happen. In general, we can pick the good candidates for specific events. We can set up the timing of the events, but we don't know if you're going to like the orc, if it's going to be an orc you remember, or if you're going to kill him right away. We're just trying to encourage these exceptional stories of hate and love. So I went to Reddit and I found a story to illustrate. This is Deoxys who wrote this story. He was killed by a grunt, and the grunt was promoted to the gambler, and he was angry, so he decided to hunt down that gambler, and then he recruited him. He said, you're going to be on my team. And together, they killed enemies together, and it was really great. He felt good about that. And then he was betrayed by the gambler and killed. Oh, now he was so angry, so he hunted him down, and he says, I'm going to punish this guy worse than death. I'm going to shame him. And he lowered his level, and he found him again, and he shamed him a second time. So he lowered his level even more, and at that moment, the gambler became deranged, and instead of speaking, he started to just say, you never gave me a chance. You never gave me a chance. And he felt really bad, and so he recruited him again. And then they were together, and then one time he was even saved by by the gambler. And he said, this is the greatest orc ever. A good example of success, right? A Nemesis story. Even better than the stories are people talking about how they felt emotionally about the game, how the game impacted them emotionally. Here's a couple quotes. I'll read the first one. I went from seething rage to overzealous excitement in 20 minutes. So, yeah, this is really, really satisfying to see this. It means we succeeded in inspiring players feel these emotions, hate and love, the satisfaction of defeating their nemesis eventually. So that's the end of my talk. I hope you found it inspiring and memorable. Okay, and I don't know how much time we have. Okay, we got 5 minutes. If anybody wants to ask questions, consider joining us at Monolith on what we're working on next.
Awesome talk.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Hello. So this mechanic of you need to get defeated first to get this revenge loop and get better loot and so on. Got this mechanic exploited at some point, or was it a danger that okay, I get better loot if I let the orc defeat me, because then I can do the revenge, and without it, it's not happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. So could people exploit it by dying intentionally to get better loot, and so they become more powerful? Well, if you do, you will have an orc who then also gets a nice story, and sometimes you don't always kill him successfully, so you're already engaging in a way that we want you. And the impact of the loot is minor enough that the variety of the orcs is great enough. We don't know if it's going to actually, we doubt that it will actually impact your success to such a substantial degree. Yeah.
Do you have the data on the most number of times someone was killed by the same orc?
Well, we do know that some people intentionally died to the same orc over and over on purpose. I mean, we have stories of and data to show that, like, I'm going to shame an orc down to level 1, and then I'm going to die over and over and over and over until he is max level, and then I'm going to shame him back down. And so we have data that shows, like, several hundred times. But I don't think that's accidental. I think that's all intentional. It's hard to know what players are doing intentionally, so yeah.
Awesome talk, thank you. What would your recommendations be for someone who wanted to make a similar system but with a different play mechanic, like you were trading with the orcs or dating the orcs?
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. It's such a monumental amount of work, and it's so complicated. So I hope you have a large team, and I guess my advice would be focus really narrowly if you can, because it's going to end up exploding in scope before you know it.
Thanks.
Yeah, and try to make things memorable. I think that's a key. Yeah. All right, thanks everybody.